Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Well, hello and welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so thrilled that you're here today because we have a guest who is someone who was fundamental for me in my own yoga journey, who was one of the first teachers that I deeply connected with working at his retreat center on Koh Samui Island at that time, back in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was called Yoga Thailand, but it has since been transformed in the Samahita Yoga Retreat Center, and many of you may have even visited there. He started his own teacher training program, which I was an assistant on back in the Yoga Thailand days, and it continues on to this day. And it has taught many, many Ashtanga yoga teachers all over the world how to practice and teach Ashtanga yoga. But we're not really talking about the Ashtanga yoga practice today, even though Paul Dallaghan is a certified Ashtanga yoga teacher, certified by Sri K. Patabi Joyce. We are going to talk instead about pranayama, which really is the blessing of being in that environment with him in Thailand, where I met my pranayama teacher and guru. We share Sri O.P. Tawari, who is truly, truly a master and a true guru in the sense of the word. And we're going to talk about how the pranayama practice, going deep, deep into it, led to spiritual growth and development, as well as a very regulated nervous system. There's going to be some interesting stories about microdosing and how it may or may not have affected Paul on his journey, his experiments with those things, as well as what makes perhaps his own journey very fascinating and unique, which is his degree, his PhD in biological anthropology. He received this PhD after doing very intense studies, of course, at Emory University, specializing in the study of breath and related practices like yoga, of course. And so we are going to look at both the historical origins of pranayama and yoga, as well as some of the clinical protocols that he brought into his studies to scientifically measure and get real results around the importance of breathing and the yogic practices, what works, what doesn't work, as well as the effects on mental health, stress, and longevity. This is a conversation for all of the yoga nerds out there. If you love learning about true scientific benefits when related to yoga and breathing, pranayama in particular, or easy to practice breathwork practices, we're going to talk all about this today and why practicing yoga does indeed help your longevity, but only when it's practiced in a particular way. This is going to be a very, very fascinating conversation. I cannot wait to get started. So let's jump into chatting with my friend of over 20 years and fellow teacher, Paul Dallaghan. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so pleased you're tuning in today with me because I am here with a very old friend, Paul Dallaghan. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Good morning from sunny California.
Yeah, that's amazing. But you're not initially from California. I can hear that in your voice.
Yeah, well, it's not a Canadian accent, that's for sure. Yes, originally from Ireland, born and bred. So spent the first 23 years of my life Irish bound, growing up, studying.
Then what happened? How'd you get to America? Where'd you go?
Well, you could say the adventure started really in my teens. When I was 16, I started working and living on a farm in France. And that's where some like sort of inner things were experienced, but I didn't really know what that was about then. And so from there, between back to college in Ireland and then working in different parts of Europe, I eventually ended up on a kibbutz in Israel just after I graduated college. And at that time, I also got offered a green card for the US. So I was like, okay, do I stay working in Europe? Do I go to America? I did a year of work in Germany. And then I was like, enough. New York is calling.
What were you working on in Europe and on a kibbutz? What were you
Uh,
doing?
Well, kibbutz was an adventure. It was almost a spontaneous thing of, okay, let's just go and see what this part of the world is about. In some ways, it sort of was tapping into this anthropology nerve that I didn't know existed till later. So just living in different cultures and doing different things. And so it wasn't really about making money because I definitely didn't make any money. You're living in this kind of like socialist setup. But as I was there was one other guy doing a sort of a Tai Chi yoga practice that I started to connect with. So it's like little seeds were being sown on a farm in France, on a kibbutz in Israel. I just graduated. I'd graduated with business economics at a Trinity College in Dublin. But I just wanted to explore other aspects of the world and life. And believe it or not, then I ended up doing a year's apprentice in a trading company between Ireland and Germany, but it was trading of meat. But then I said, this is not for me. And that's when I just wanted to get to New York. But as soon as I got to New York, I found myself in the complete opposite of what I'd been in this sort of alternative, sort of spiritual green scene that was starting in the mid 90s. Let's put it that way.
With all the yoga and the healthy green juices. And what were you doing at that time?
I said, okay. And, maybe some people who are listening might have faced something similar, or definitely some of the younger ones now. You follow a course of life. You study something, and in a way, it kind of sets you up. So, I'd studied this economics, business, kind of sets you up for going into either consulting firms or Wall Street or that. So I was interviewing for that. And then after a few weeks, I said, what am I doing? What will I do here except make money? Which could be motivating enough, but this was me at 23, turning 24. So I just said, I need to explore. And instead of looking at the New York Times big jobs, I started looking at the Village Voice. And then on the back of the Village Voice, almost in the middle, was the word yoga. And I was like, okay, what's that? Let me check that out. And eventually I found my way, because it was kind of a little promo for the Shivananda Center in New York. So I found my way there. And I can still remember the feeling I had. It was, this feels like home. And I didn't know why or what, but it definitely was like a warm or a good feeling that in some ways I suppose I've been searching for. So that kind of triggered, right, forget this career job path. Let's see, which is good advice to give to young kids. Forget this career job path. Let's see what is really calling me here. So,
Yeah, wow.
in a bizarre way, in New York, with all its like big money, crazy stuff, it sort of has a current to support different tracks. I hesitate to use the word alternative, but definitely was alternative back then. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It definitely wasn't the yoga scene as it is today, where it seems like, yoga is being used to advertise all kinds of things. And back then it was sort of like a little bit far out, a little bit weird, a little bit alternative, and not so many people were into it.
It's funny how the gods have their plans and fate does its thing. When I sort of walked away from the interviewing for those jobs, I got a restaurant job in the East Village. And as it turned out, right above it was a Thai restaurant, and right above that was a young Jiva Mukti yoga studio. And then I found a room living above that. So suddenly my life was getting defined by this one building. Thai, my job, Thai, the yoga center, and my little room above. And it was very, I'd say it was part of the thing and acceptable within that setting, village life, New York City. But when you extend beyond that, yeah, it was a bit weird or alternative. I remember talking to guys from college saying, this yoga stuff is really interesting. And they just looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Actually, they used a few expletives, but a few years down the line, those guys are doing yoga and they're asking me for help on their aching backs. So
Yeah.
so 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 at that time, I suppose what intrigued me as a 23, 24-year-old was, well, this is just, it's free, it's open, it's different, and it seems to be saying something to something inside of me, as opposed to just purely the rational mind.
Yeah. So you follow this current, but how did you end up in India and Thailand?
Well, I had to endure many years in New York first, that's for sure. Yeah, after 3 years of a mixture of things in New York, I just said, you could say I realized yoga is what mainly interests me. I mean, that was part of the learning, the exploration. So at that point, mid late 20s, I just committed to the yoga path, and I'd always wanted to get and visit India, but you know, um, even though yoga teaching was better than restaurant work, you're still not making big bucks like if I had gone the Wall Street route. So it took me a number of years to even just have enough money to get a flight out of New York and get to India. And once I got to India, and I think that was 99, 2000, early 2000. I think I'd gone for the Mahakumbha Mela as well. And I'd gone down to Patabi Joyce. He was opening a temple for his late wife. And then I went up to a few other places, so which could be a good part of the story to talk about here. But this experience of a couple of months, the first time in India, at that point, I came back to New York thinking, what am I doing here? I think I'm done. And I, my partner at the time, who Jatima, who became my wife and ex-wife,
Yes.
as the circuit goes, girlfriend, wife, ex-wife,
Yeah.
but still, good friend. So I just said to her, I want to go. I think I need a year, right?
Hmm.
To just practice and be there. And I said, do you want to come? And she said, okay, but let's go to Thailand also. So that just started a journey where I thought I'd be back moving to California a year later after 1 year in Asia. But of course, it turned into till now, still
Like 20
with
years?
with a base in Thailand and still visits to India. And I only just moved to California, so that took 24 years or something to get this step.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm curious, what was it that drew you to India in the first place? Because not everyone who practices yoga in New York or is teaching yoga in New York is necessarily drawn to India. And I know you have, not just Patabi Joyce, you were interested in the Kumbh Mela and in very, rich spiritual experiences and working. Were you already working with Sri Opitwari at this time? Was he another reason why you were pulled to India?
Well, the pull to India was even before I met these key teachers.
Hmm.
The pull seemed to come from something as a draw from inside. So, if you go back to that first day in the Shivananda Center, not knowing anything about yoga or Indian spirituality, but I felt a certain connection or kinship. And then that started me just on reading the different texts, not in a highly scholarly way at that time, because I would just pick up a Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to try and see what the Yoga Sutras was about. But I was also the name Shiva, resonated with me. And and then I started to hear about Kailash, and so for the first few years, where I didn't really have a guiding teacher force, there were teachers who were leading classes that I would go to, but there was no, guide, guru, etc. So really, the urge to go was born then, as I was exploring for myself. And it wasn't to go over and do a particular practice. It was to go over and sort of experience the culture and where this is coming from, and being able to sort of absorb into the practice as well. So by the time, events sort of came together in my life where I had just saved enough money, I just started this relationship, I just met Tawari, started Pranayama. I had, even though I'd been in the Ashtanga for a couple of years, I just met Patabi Joyce because now he was, started his travels again back then. So all of that kind of coalesced at the same time. Then it was like, okay, let me go over and practice and be in it and absorb it. I suppose the aim was to, if I'm going to swim in these waters, let me dive in and swim. And the thought was, after the initial traveling in India, just go and live and practice there for a while. I didn't intend that to be, long term in Mysore or other years traveling around, etc. Mm-hmm. But there was a sense of something being touched inside. And it's kind of like, you start college and then you feel, oh, I'm into this, I'll finish my degree. Oh, I'll go on and do maybe a master's PhD. And you end up spending, instead of 3 or 4 years, you end up spending 10 years or more studying. So it was something like that of, oh, this is making sense. I'm just going to keep at it and keep living with this. And when not practicing in India, I would go wandering, pilgrimage, go up into the Himalaya, and that was almost just as valuable, just as part of. I call it the education. It was like the education after having done the kind of formal initial college stuff.
Yeah, I think that's such a special experience, and I do have definitely your encouragement to thank for that too. Instead of, hanging out in Mysore for, infinite periods of time, but taking times and months of traveling and going and doing pilgrimages and meeting spiritual teachers, that was definitely something that I think was a ripple down effect from your own adventures and passion in meeting different teachers. It was definitely something that evoked my own curiosity, and I think very grateful for those rich experiences in India of just being in the culture and seeing different temples and teachers and places and people. And there's so much life outside of Gokulam or Mysore that many people don't actually explore, which is always a surprise to me.
Yeah, it's funny thing is, I've still never been to Goa or to Rajasthan or the Taj Mahal, right? The kind of the 3 touristy spots I've still never been to, but the all the other aspects of India have been fascinating and calling. And so meeting and hanging with you there in Mysore, this was a nice kind of, okay, let's put our feet down and do some practice. But then just as equal to that, and part of the education was, well, let's get the feet moving. And you end up in Arunachala, because you've read about Ramana Maharshi down south. You go see Amachi, you're down in Kerala. You go up to, I don't know, I kept getting drawn up to the mountains, the Himalaya. Yeah. Often when I'm asked what would be one of your favorite spots, I say, well, if you put me in a helicopter now, just drop me up in
Kedarnath?
Well, just be now I'm blank. Gangotri. Yeah, and where you go up from there, Gomukh. The rising of the Ganga. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah. So that I just think it when I look at it now, sort of looking back over the last 30 years, it was a education, New York, practice, previous to that, like study. Then it was the 30s were very much, or my 30s. I was past 30. What are you talking about? My 30s, in, this time in India, Thailand, and into the different spiritual spots before maybe some of the over commercial appeal of this has kind of changed the nature of it,
Yeah.
So in some ways, we were lucky with that timing.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Do you feel like, I'm curious, and I mean you've such depth of knowledge in many subjects, so we can talk about lots of things, but this awakening, this inner calling, that you speak of and that drew you to all these spiritual places and teachers and has pulled you on this path, this, some people might call it an intuition, some people might call it, I don't know, a spiritual life force or kundalini. What do you think it is? What is this sort of inner essence that kind of gets awakened often when we enter into a path or enter into a spiritual practice that then kind of starts directing or guiding? I mean, it seems to me your path has been very directed and guided.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic with a few little questions actually in there. If I go to my first experience, which was at 16 on a farm in France, right? So there was nothing Eastern or mystical, etc., but there was something magical, and there was some very specific experiences there. One, I was sort of left alone in nature a lot, and then two, there was a connection with a young special child that sort of impacted. I think awoke my heart, and so I could only put that together years later. But I know that when I left there, my to use the language now, there was a transformation of consciousness. There was a shift. So what is that? That in a way, the interest becomes more towards what's going on inside. It's not like you get all philosophical and say, "Who am I? What's life about? What's this?" That might enter into it, but it's more that the pull or flow of mental attention. It obviously, and me at 16, 17, 18, it didn't leave the world, but it starts having an interest in subtler things, in things that are more meaningful than just procreation and making money, and feeding myself. So I would say that is sort of the essence of the current. You're either directed more internally or you're pulled more externally. And when we are interested in an inner development, a degree of cultivating sort of clarity, peace, when these things are more a priority than the size of my bank account or certain other like sort of physical stimuli. And I'm not saying that one negates the other, because we live in the world and we still aim to be productive, earn, but there's a certain awareness and conscientiousness about how to earn and what to do, etc. Like I know for me, I stood on the largest trading floor in Wall Street, which is probably the largest one in the world back then in 1995, Merrill Lynch, and I said, "What will I do here but make money?" And that's no offense to anyone who's in the who chose that and is in the finance business, but there must have been something in me that was like, I can walk away from that and look for something else. And in looking for something else, I had to earn, $400 or $500 a week in a restaurant, and nothing more, So there was a trade-off. There was a payoff, but I didn't. There's a little bit of struggle because you feel your pride is kind of gets a knock because I studied this and I was meant to do things. But again, I would say, well, that's just me on the kind of material world level. So I would say that the current with its own integrity is drawn to aspects that cultivate the part of the personality, but that inner aspect of consciousness. Now, when we bring in the kind of language of the words like Kundalini, etc., recently I was looking at something, and it was someone who'd taken I think a Kundalini activation course in Bali, right? So that's where my sirens go off and say, because my understanding, one of how I've been educated on the path of Kundalini, with O.P. Tiwari, who you know well, and the practices that are to cultivate that. So and then it's just like, I suppose, yoga in the public sense just means the body physical stuff. But when you look at yoga, it's the whole meditative path. Kundalini seems to have been thrown out there as when you start feeling energy moving in your pelvis and around your body. Oh, there's a Kundalini bit, and I feel it in the spine, etc. And in a strict sense, this is definitely not Kundalini. It's far from it. This is the movement of energy. This is pranic stimulation. Mm-hmm. It could also be pranic or energetic disturbance, right? So that's the thing to sort of watch, and that's where having like good teacher, good guide, because I know that's what helped me, because it's very easy to overdo things or to approach it wrong, or to sort of self-delude. And when you have other people saying, oh, that's your Kundalini, oh, that teacher awoke you, oh, we can do things. And in other words, the actual event of something like a channeled energetic awakening and force and movement comes after a while of very internalized practice. So what you could say is awakening is something that's going to come before that, right? Meaning the state of your mind has sort of woke up a bit that the stuff I'm presented with in the world, the material presentation of that, I can see it more for what it is, and it doesn't bring full satisfaction to me. So I look to, without getting lost in the hype and the glitz, I look to that which nourishes my soul more, right? So that at least is where I would say the sort of awakening aspect is, which is that's possible for us all, and it could sort of come at any particular moment for any individual, because you have your aha moment or you have some deeper experience. And the way I actually like to describe this, and it's also how I kind of talk about meditation and its effect, is I use this phrase: it touches you. So you get this sense of, like you could be in a very deep, meaningful relationship, and that could be with your romantic partner, or it could be with your newborn child, or it could be like what I think what happened to me in France. There were kids in the farm that lived with, and the youngest was 6, and she was Down syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. Mentally handicapped, Down syndrome, and this was my first interaction, but her and I became so bonded, so close. I mean, in many ways, I look at her now as a teacher. She was a sort of a special spiritual being, and it massively touched my heart. And there was no agenda, there was no way of knowing or aiming at that. I was put in a situation, and this is what happened, in a very natural setting. And so with that, and this is slightly different than, I'm in love with this person, and I feel something, infatuation, so something has moved and touched you. And even committing to certain practices, like I would even suggest a deeper, sincere, that word sincere, right? Meditation practice,
Yeah.
or even like with pranayama, when you're really practicing that and you allow yourself to kind of drop into it, over a period of time of dropping into that, it actually touches you. There's a deep effect. And even when I gesture that now, any of you watching on YouTube, when I say touch you, I'm going right to my heart because you feel it there. Though there's a sort of a shift across the kind of mental processing. So let's say, one could have a genuine awakening, but then, and now you're awake, you got to get out of bed and get on with the day of this life, right?
Yeah.
So then it is almost needed, not just beneficial, but it's really needed, to have some path of something to work on, practice wise. Okay, well, from wherever that comes, and I would almost say that across a few decades, you're probably going to get into a mixture of approaches from different cultures and traditions. That's been my experience. And before, when it was limited to one culture or tradition, often that was based on space and time.
Yeah.
Like if you could spend your life wandering all over India, and you'd be within that culture and time. You'd have to have made a huge effort to maybe get out to Persia and into Europe and see other things. But in our time, we can hop between Tibet, India, the US, back to Europe, a monastery in France. The next week it could be in.
You
So
can do that all in a day on the internet.
yeah, and exactly. So now we're living it virtually to the advantages of modern travel, etc. But even with those advantages, one has to sort of come to themselves and put the effort and time into something. And so there is where you go from just being, an awakening to being interested in the inner journey is how I would describe that.
I want to ask you a question about some of these things because I mean you've had a very dedicated pranayama practice for a long time in this very traditional lineage coming from India, but then you've also expanded your studies and received a PhD in science of some sort, right? Studying the effects of some of these practices from a Western perspective or a scientific perspective, not just sort of a lineage mystical perspective. What have you found? Like, where's maybe the bridge, or how would you describe what's happening to a practitioner when we sit down and we engage in meditation or pranayama from a scientific perspective? And do you feel like that's added a different dimension or element to your understanding of what's going on?
Yes. So by the time I got into the academic work, it's nice to sort of see the stages of these things. The years of full on practice and studying from that perspective, very, for want of a better term, call it the kind of Eastern practitioner way. I'd kind of reached its max, after 10 years of that. So, and I feel that having done the practice part first was crucial to my own progress then in what you might call a modern, I don't want to say Western because that's not fair, because the academic institutions are advanced on the East and in the West, etc. So it's more of a traditional practice approach to a modern that brings in science and aspects of the humanities approach, right? But it's academia. It's more these things are approached at a slight distance. You shouldn't even show a kind of an interest in it because you're supposed to be that much removed. But I went into the field of anthropology, and anthropology refers to the study of humans, and it's well known for the study of all different aspects of culture. But then there's also a field, a subfield of anthropology called physical or biological anthropology. So it just sort of came to me, but I found this to be the best approach to study a tradition like yoga, meditation, this whole world, because you're dealing with human beings. Like if I'd gone into neuroscience, I would be put in some of these theories or thoughts or hypotheses that I have from practice, but we'd have to study it in rodents, mice or rats, right?
Right. Yeah.
Psychology, okay, you could do it with people, but you kind of are limited to certain experiments. So anthropology, I could get into, and I had to, it was a lot of work, the whole cultural side. So I spent probably 45% of my work, and even the content of the dissertation was to go through the texts of this entire tradition, for the last 2,500 years. And even though I'd been living and practicing and studying in India and doing all this, I still hadn't gone to the depth of exploring these texts like the way this forced me to. Mm-hmm. So I had a desire, and then, you get involved in a program of study and it forces. So in some ways, there were certain insights and enlightenments just from the textual study alone.
What texts were you reading? Like in particular, were you kind of focused on?
Well, I there's at least 61 texts I went into that are covered and involved in what I wrote. But because if you look at all the Shaiva Tantra and some of the Tantric Buddhist texts, but then before that you go to the classical stuff of prior to the Upanishads themselves, the main ones, and then you start coming out of the other end of the Tantric Shaiva, and you get into all the what is best to sort of term as proto Hata-Raja texts before you get the actual body of Hatha Yoga itself. I prefer to call that Hata-Raja Yoga, which I could explain a little bit. And then you have the period of text that came in the last 300-400 years that are some of them fall under Yoga Upanishads, others are sort of Hatha Yoga compendiums. So there was just a whole mix of this, and I broke it down across different time periods and the different influences they had. So that taught me a lot just about actually the origin of some of these practices, the origin of some of these breath practices, the formation from different traditions, which came to be the presentation of Hatha Yoga in the 15th century. So that alone was an insight. And even though your question was around science, this was sort of key to establish, if we're going to study yogic practices, well, where do they come from? What are their original statements? And what are their precursors? What I would get frustrated in is, and this is, I suppose, my criticism of this scientific study of yoga practice that's been published so far, is that there are some very good studies with very good protocols, but the majority are, we studied yoga, and it's very unclear what the method, technique, or specific practice was, or how it was even put together. And some are downright just made up, and some are a little bit loose and casual, which is in sharp contrast to the scientific method. So the paper, because it's been published, passes peer review for scientific method, right? Meaning the study design, the statistical analysis, the presentation of that. Mm-hmm. So, and especially if it's going to be in a higher level journal, a major scientific journal, it would have to have that at a very high level. But there was a gap in explaining yoga, the yoga practice, and the specifics of the technique. So my view was, right, I'm covering a cultural and I'm covering a biological. So I need to get into uh, the real base of these practices. So when I put together protocols for practice under scientific analysis, then what was in those protocols are these yoga practices that can be found in these texts going back these times. And of course, it's not just all about everything in a text. It's like, and how this now works in a living, breathing, real tradition of practice, and how you separate that out from something that's just become popular and has a sort of a primarily physical input. For me, it was important to cover comprehensive yogic presentation.
What does that involve? What is a comprehensive yogic presentation?
So, if you start really looking at the yoga tradition, you'll see that maybe a good entry point is something with the body, right? But not for everybody. You can enter through some of the devotional practice, or you could enter through some of the mental meditative practice. But in general, and as we know, the popularity of yoga, it's situated around the kind of physical, the body. However, if that was all you followed for the next 20, 30 years, it would be like just eating one type of food for the rest of your life, or only reading one kind of book, or playing one kind of sport or something. So when I say comprehensive, when you start to look at it and think about like the time we spent together, right? Back in the days when we wouldn't just get up and do Ashtanga yoga, vinyasa practice, right? That was one part of what we were doing. We were getting up to do certain contemplative meditation techniques that involves actual contemplation as well as mantra and other silent stuff. And then, of course, the whole breath pranayama practice, which involves preparatory stuff, kriyas, as well as the actual full-on pranayama itself. And then you have, the body asana. And then how is that even done? And does it feed and relate to the others? So often I'd see the popularity of, say, an asana practice, but the question is, does it link? Does it have some input on the pranayama and meditative practices? Initially, this whole set of techniques are designed like that. One supports the other and builds it. So if I'm going to be able to sit and work with my breath, well, my asana should have cultivated the support and the capacity for that. Or I could practice asana. I could get a nice kind of a workout, but I might have like shifted my autonomic nervous balance, and then I'm going for pranayama, and I can still do it, but I'm not getting the full benefit or impact as if I had understood how they were related. So I hope that is making sense. So when I say comprehensive, it's that full sense of practices together.
So there was like the program that you would have been studying and that you created would have a physical component, like an asana type component, as well as a breathing component, a contemplative or meditative component, as well as some like emotional devotive component. Is that?
Yeah, I have 3 protocols which have particular acronyms, which I'm going to have to remember right now.
That's all right.
but when I've presented some of this stuff at more scientific conferences, when I put up the three aspects of that were done in a comprehensive yoga practice by our intervention group, our study group,
Yeah.
It's easy for me to say it's all breath based, and the heart centered meditative approach is soft to almost silent breath. Right, the body based asana approach, which I actually called SEDA, slow, engaged, dynamic asana, right? And dynamic doesn't mean jumping around, though one might have a bit of movement. It's sort of like how you approach the asana itself dynamically from within inside the body, but slow and engaged. And that would involve a particular medium level of breath as appropriate to match the physical effort. And then the full breath practice approach itself, covering the whole pranayama sort of tradition, is a full breath approach. So you could say the comprehensive approach is breath based, but it's at different levels of the breath being used. Pranayama using the breath specifically, but asana to be done effectively needs breath coordinating with that. And then, actually when that's working and you sit in a sort of a meditative way, then you actually are able to let the breath reduce. So that as a comprehensive practice, which is very feasible, by the way, it's not, it just has to be learned to sort of in pieces. Like it was very, this was not a challenge for me and a team to teach this to a group of 42 over a 6-week period. There were 2 control groups, just back on the scientific side. One of the control groups was only doing asana. Now, admittedly, it was the do a pose, rest, as opposed to sort of a more vinyasa active approach. So one control group were active and the other control group were passive, meaning they just did whatever they do in their life. There was no sort of input from our study. Now, what is interesting about this is again, you take a scientific approach. I would even step out of a lot of the teaching. There had to be a team. The key thing, one of the key things we were assessing, and you'll get this word, Harmony, to be sincere, right?
Yeah.
think about towards you all those years. Sincerity. And that word has always stayed with me. And when you look in the yogic texts, you'll see this concept of sincerity come up in the sense of how involved, how engaged, how much you take it on and mean it. And as a teacher watching people, especially when doing pranayama or meditative technique, you can see if people are in it or not, right? And then you can sort of, for a teacher in a traditional sense, no science involved, it's about the degree of sincerity means you've got something to work with. Not because it's a serious student and they can show up and they're there and they really mean it. And then, 2 years later, they're gone, right? Sincere is, I hear you, I'm listening, I'll do it, I'll follow, I get into it, I have an experience, So a key thing was to build, encourage that sincerity or engagement across the practices, and then to assess that. And so I gave a term to that called engaged participation. So you could say the hypotheses would involve, okay, we hypothesize there will be a change, an improvement in this marker, right? For instance, some of the blood markers or physiology, heart rate variability, or some of the psychology markers. or one I did around the abdomen. So the hypothesis is, this will improve from baseline, and that a secondary hypothesis on that is that the more engaged one is, so the more in it you are, there will be an effect or a greater effect.
Okay, so it doesn't matter in this study, it doesn't matter if you were doing the slow approach or the medium approach or the intense approach. It was more about how engaged you were, like how sincere you were in what you were doing.
Yeah, so if you look at it in a fundamental sense, I was more interested in comprehensive yoga practice as opposed to asana did this, breath did that. That's like saying, well, this cell in your body just does that, or this vitamin just does that. Whereas we know how a yogic meditative practice works. It's you really come together in all aspects.
Yeah.
So, as I said, one control group were just doing asana. The intervention study group were doing the mixture of practices.
Okay. But was it like some were slow and some was kind of medium and some was more intense?
Yeah, it involved the meditative, the pranayama, and the slower asana.
Okay, but they're all doing the same practice.
The intervention group are.
Okay.
The study group. Whereas the control group is only doing
asana.
Yeah, simple
and
asana.
Then some were doing nothing.
And some were doing nothing, exactly. This was registered as a clinical trial. So to get it at that level, you don't want just one control group because it doesn't tell you enough. So one active, one passive, meaning not do anything, and then the study group who are basically doing, again, back to how would I relate that, breath-based yoga practice. Call it that for now, right?
Yeah.
Now, all of them, including the controls, all of them were assessed for engagement, for sincerity, right? Not just the study group. Anyone who was practicing got a score from the mixture of teachers, not directly from me. And then all of that is anonymized. But anyway, enough of me talking. Let's jump to the punchline.
Yeah, I want to know the results already.
Well, one of these papers is getting close. It's close to getting out there, published. But the one of the markers is telomeres, right? Telomere length. Yeah. Now, so when you look at the chromosome inside the cell that has it houses the DNA, for the genetic material. That chromosome, if it starts to wear down, it unravels, and then that cell doesn't reproduce, and that's just considered aging, right? So when the telomere can sort of reproduce, sort of lengthen again, there's a robustness to the cell, call it better health span, better longevity. So I was working with the key people at UCSF in San Francisco, UCSF, for this part. And bottom line is the intervention, meaning the breath-based yoga practice group, right, the comprehensive group, that group, and only that group, saw a very significant increase in telomeres. That increase means again, one has to talk in potential terms, but that means that the longevity, the life of the cell is at least prolonged, right? So it's a good, in terms of the whole longevity conversation out there, it's like, wow. This is the first study to show anything like that in terms of yoga, meditation, breath, like a conclusive, significant from baseline to end of practice increase in telomere length. But here's where it gets more interesting. First of all, the group only doing asana actually had a minor shortening.
Ooh, too much
Can you?
stress.
Yeah. and
Even lying down between postures.
yeah, and then the passive group sort of, no real change,
Yeah.
a little bit of a change, but nothing much. And when we say significant, it means that at a statistical level, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, one, okay, that's good. I wasn't even thinking that this could be an outcome, and so I was quite surprised when I saw it. So that's one. But more importantly, when you go in and do a little more analysis to see, well, what are the different factors that could influence that?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it could be, is it being male versus female? Is it being older versus younger? Is it that like in this case, were you more engaged or less engaged, meaning
Mm-hmm.
more sincere or less sincere, and so on. And so by far the most predictive factor for this change in longevity, increase in telomeres, was how engaged you were.
Wow.
So what's all that mean? Thank you for continuing to listen. What does all that mean? It's in some ways I say, well, what you practice is important, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously more comprehensive, more well-rounded, and breath-based had a particular effect versus just asana or nothing. But how you practice is crucial, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even in our group that reported an increase in telomere length, those that were not that engaged
Mm-hmm.
um, did not really experience that effect. Whereas when you look at it from more engaged, more in it, more involved, more sincere, that is the biggest sort of factor that influences this change. Now, there's a bunch of other things around mental health and stress, anxiety, etc. But I'd be stuck here talking to you more.
Well, that's
So
so interesting, because I think like wellness these days and like the list of practices and things to do to make yourself feel better, to regulate your nervous system, or it's like an infinite list. And I feel like sometimes our wellness expectations are actually kind of making us sicker in a way, because they become this like another thing to do when you're already stressed out. Like, how helpful is it to have also the obligation to like meditate and breathe and do asana and journal and do all these things? And so what you're saying, if I can kind of, extrapolate a little, is that, even just picking one thing, even if it's 2 minutes, and just doing it with sincerity and being in it, is going to be a more benefit than doing kind of the long laundry list of things to do, if you're just doing them because you're like, oh, I have to do this to feel good. But maybe that's actually not going to be helpful. Maybe it's actually being in it with sincerity, getting present, trying to connect to back to what we were talking about, that heart or that energy within yourself, is going to have more of a beneficial effect than just doing the practices.
yeah, the narrative outcome is the real juice of this comes from being involved in with it. You can relate that then, though in a scientific way, I'm saying, okay, that's what we find in this study. But like, so let's talk now as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Let's relate that to relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay, one might have whatever interests and preferences, but let's say you've got one partner,
Yeah.
and being fully in that is richness to a relationship, however many years you've been together. Um, today, of course, wellness is quite a topic, aspects of spirituality, etc. And there's ways to hack them or biohack and all of this. But I always, and I've gone in and looked at that world, and of course people can do it sincerely, but like you say, you can be left taking 80 pills and doing
And cold showers.
yeah. Well, admittedly, I do the cold shower, but I was doing the cold shower back in early Thailand days because we didn't even have hot showers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the thing is, whatever you take on, you want to take it on because you're into it and you mean it. You know what I mean? It's just like with a person, with friendship, with a relationship, you're into it and you mean it. So I do think that is a huge point, or aspect that one comes out of this study. But when you look at like the teaching of these traditions, that's basically what they're saying. You know, you've got to like embrace it. Shraddha, is one word to look at that. And if not, this, for sure you can get some physiological benefits, but you really reduce the possibility of that probably by 2 or 3 times. So in short, embrace, engage, be in it.
Yeah, full immersion.
Well, one of the other very interesting findings that will go in a different paper was on the mental health side. Again, we talk about stress, but there's a great measure of perceived stress, right? Which is more appropriate to the psychological dimension. Perceived because the event isn't happening, right? You're in your head ruminating. You're perceiving like, oh my God, tomorrow or this isn't happening, or will I get this? Will that happen to me? Or will I meet someone? Or how do I pay for that? All of that goes on, right? The perceive. So our degree of like how we look at the world, call it optimism, and perception of how we look at things. So this is really a great measure that's been well tested and studied and justified over the last 20 years. So perceived stress, but then there's also ways of looking at anxiety, and these two factors, similarly with the breath-based practice group, right, our kind of more well-rounded yoga practice, had big breakthroughs, like again significant. Meaning it's great for me to report and do a paper on, right? So that's a good result. And it's not going to say, oh, look, yoga practice can work, right? It says, when you approach practice in a more comprehensive way and when you engage in it more, we have found that there's a change in longevity via telomere length. And we've also found a change in mental health markers, which such as how you perceive and handle stress and anxiety.
That's
And
fascinating because it's an
yeah,
emotional reaction you're having to your thoughts that creates that perceived stress, right? You think, oh, I have to do this thing. And the emotion that comes up around it is, or, right? Like I'm so tired. That's so hard, right? And that's an emotional experience that you're having, which is very interesting because what you're saying also about being present and being in it and then doing these comprehensive breath-based practices is really like connecting to regulating your limbic system, I would suspect, and regulating your emotional kind of reactivity to things, which of course is going to help create less anxiety, less perceived stress in your life, because rather than being dysregulated from an autonomic nervous system perspective and that affecting your emotions, you're going to be more regulated or more able to manage in that emotional sphere whatever is coming at you in your future or in your present.
yeah, it's the interesting part of working this with humans is, of course, you can get more narrative and qualitative data, but it's very hard to identify the mechanisms in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would hypothesize that it's not just networks in the brain, meaning like I engage in practice and now instead of me ruminating, I become a little, I shift away from that, become a bit more positive. So there's one aspect in terms of a network, like
Mm-hmm.
different circuitry in the
Yes.
brain. But the other aspect is it's I don't want to get stuck in too many big words here, but there's sort of a morphological
Mm-hmm.
change. Like if you were to look at a neuron, they're kind of plastic,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can down on the spready tree bit, the dendrites, you can have more spikes rise on them, and then they can withdraw. Right now, if you were to try to look at that in a post mortem, a dead person's brain, you won't see it. You know, they're dead. It's gone. All that's withdrawn. So, but something happens in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to again, I can only hypothesize if I'm being strictly scientific, but I've come to the understanding that something goes on beyond just straight up physiology. Something goes on in a sort of a right down to the shape and space of the neuron itself, because when you have that, the contact for different neurotransmitters suddenly
Mm-hmm.
doubles or triples.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
so when you if you were to look at doing a breath practice versus taking psychedelics, for instance,
Yeah.
right, which is something we should study, right? And
Yeah.
I've been talking to some people about, but I have very different experiences with psychedelics after all these practices than what one is supposed to have. You see,
Mm.
and so
Tell
so
me
I.
more about that.
Well, I was so now I'm in LA. I'm connecting here with UCLA and the world's top you could say the leading expert in neuroscience for the breath is here in UCLA. So I've developed a nice relationship with him, Professor Jack Feldman, wonderful guy, and he's the one who discovered the breath center in the brainstem,
Mm-hmm.
and the specifics. He actually named the pre-Botzinger complex, the specifics that kind of control the rhythm of breathing, all of that. That's too much to get into. But and I even just had this conversation with him about the experience psychedelics and having sort of zero impact, zero change in hallucinatory sense, right? And his feedback, amongst others I've discussed to, is, wow, the breath practice must have had some impact on that. Which,
Interesting.
you know, when I and I suppose a little backstory in this, the last 7 years, because a lot of people were asking me about psychedelics, etc. So I said, okay, I've just got to try them all.
Yeah.
and
Why not?
and and I said it to Tawari. I said, look, I'm getting asked all these questions. I think I should just you know look into these things, try them. And he was like, okay, you do, but you won't experience. It won't do anything. I said, okay, but I have to see.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been a lot of LSD, ayahuasca, psilocybin. There's a few others that I could still try, but so far, not not an impact in terms of how we describe it. I think if I was taking it 20 years ago, it would be completely different. So
But is
all
there any
that
impact? Or is there any like sense of hallucinations happening or
does
something psychedelic
for
or zero?
my experience
Yeah.
across all, and I've taken a lot of different size doses, etc. So done a fair whack. Um, Zero hallucinatory experience,
Wow.
but
Wow. You're
but
like Nim Curly Baba over there.
I went definitely not that far. But the physical effect, the body had to. So 1,000 micrograms of LSD, which is basically 8 hits, was again zero hallucinatory, but a weight on the body. Of 12 hours of, because you put that amount of acid in your body, it had to flush it out.
Yeah.
Same with the ayahuasca, etc. Though ketamine I found to be very interesting. I did these in places where they're all fully legal, and all part of my research. But and because of the science world that I get to move about in, so I get to speak to researchers on LSD, DMT, etc. And so we've had these discussions, and what I was just saying about the morphology of the neurons, the spikes, is part of what could make sense. So just going back to your earlier point, when we're practicing, it's not just a shift across my autonomic nervous system, though that's important. There's something more that's going on here that we I don't know if science will ever be able to specifically identify unless we get very, very sensitive equipment. Because you're going to have to look at these in like a living human being, and it's very, very hard to tell. But something for sure happens across emotional regulation, autonomic physiological processing, which basically means you can better handle the stressors that come to you. But also just in the sense of your earlier question about awakening and kundalini, etc. Something is going on almost across the brain, right? Just how you relate to things and process things, because that doesn't just happen in one area. Even if you're thinking like a limbic function, you've got to take it back to a mixture of the other areas,
Yeah, of course.
But
I remember Tori always saying that the Kundalini awakening is a total transformation of your personality, and your brain completely changes.
Yeah, so there's somebody talking about it from a lived personal experience.
Yeah.
And then that's why it's a little bit of a little sad today when people are talking about, oh yeah, I felt my Kundalini.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I'm curious because I do feel like there is more of an awareness of this pranic movement. And I mean, what is Kundalini? Psychosomatic force. I mean, it's a type of prana in a way, right? If everything's prana or life force energy, it's a very specific type of life force energy moving. But I feel like these practices, in my understanding, the yogic practices build this container, and they build a strong vessel, like you're speaking to hold this movement, to hold this force. I mean, even what is a psychosomatic, hallucinogenic, right? It's doing something to this energy in your body, or like opening up channels that are, creating certain effects or windows of seeing, or who knows exactly what's going on there. But when you, like you're saying, have built a strong container through these practices like yoga, then the energy has like moved in a way that's maybe more directed or channelized, that it's not just dispersing everywhere. And I think when the energy disperses, it creates interesting effects in the body. And if you're kind of maybe blocked, and these people are having these Kundalini activation sessions or whatever, maybe it is awakening to pranic or subtle movement of energy in the body that awareness or consciousness wouldn't have been aware of yet. But it's not necessarily that directed, sustained, held, grounded kind of awakening or, enlightenment experience that is talked about in these yogic texts. I don't know. Again, it's a total hypothesis, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, so when you look to the origin of the word Kundalini, it's poetic. It's just like saying my love is like a red, red rose. This is a how do I describe the force I just experienced? It was coiled and then it released. So that's what Kundalini means. It's sort of, and then they give the image of this rising snake, but you're talking about a coiled force that released and rose up. And when it's described in the tantric and then hatha yogic texts, it's about an experience at a certain point, and this is the crucial marker. It's when you go from external to internal. It's when you go from practicing, probably very sincerely, and you could have quite absorbed states, which are best known as bhavanas, right? Bhavanas, okay? Which means you're actually a good practitioner. Things are going on. But the Kundalini was literally a point of transformation, right? So when the name was given, because it's all energy, right?
Yeah.
So when the name was given an energy that now brought you from external to internal, brought you to genuinely experience meditation. So brought you from dharana to dhyana, right? The sixth to the seventh limb. When it genuinely did that, when you had that experience, that is the energy at a particular stage of cultivation that is channeled and highly directed. And for want of, well, at least the term I come up with, it's internally oriented. So upon that experience, you will be, even if it's just for 3 seconds, completely absorbed inside, away from the world outside. Okay. And in some ways that could be quantified and measured. Now, if you go back, depending on what you're doing, you've created a bit of a movement, a disturbance, a stimulation. Again, it's energy, right? Yeah. And it's moving around, and depending on what you're doing, or if you're practicing or not, etc., or it's very much tied up with like sort of sexual experience and stimulation and how you play with that. Technically you can't call it Kundalini yet, right? Because it hasn't reached that point of very channeled, where you cross over into a different state of mind. See? So what you have is it's kind of, if we give the sexual analogy, it's like foreplay. It's playing around. It's doing a bunch of different things and all that. Which you could even do, some ways of looking at Kundalini is like a spiritual puberty. You go through a change of which there's no going back on, like a physical puberty, you go through a change, you can't reverse it, but you also have this superpower now where, you could come together and create another human being. But you need, of course, you're not going to do that at 14. It happens, but you're not going to do it. You need a few years of maturation. But so in a inner sense, like even if you look at Patanjali, for those who read the Yoga Sutras and that, the last 3 limbs, dharana, the sort of inner concentrated focus, dhyana, the state of meditation, samadhi, they're the beginning of chapter 3. And so at the end of chapter 2, Patanjali is highlighting, look, pranayama sets up the mind for dharana, right? To lift the veil. So pranayama, then when you go to the tantric hatha practices, pranayama is the primary tool to channel this energy force, to have that experience. And what is that experience? That is, you get absorbed in, which is the dharana. You get absorbed in. So that's a very channeled energy, and then there's just a shift, which in biological puberty, boom, you've reached your first ovulation, or the ability to produce, semen. Something has happened, and Puberty, in a biological sense, happens in the brain, hypothalamus to pituitary, and then it's seen in the sexual organs, etc. So, in a very similar way, and again, maybe we'll just have to drop the term Kundalini, meaning this, and just say, "Woo, it's everything, this and that," because that's maybe where it'll go publicly. But there is a difference between energy stimulating in a kind of a flirtatious foreplay way to doing some practices that get it under sort of a more channeled control, to eventually experiencing that change like deep in the center of the brain, so I hope that gives some sort of insight. Does it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's a great analogy, and also, I think sometimes we don't necessarily understand what these yogic practices really were for. And especially in today's day and age, yoga's for wellness, it's for stress relief, it's for, being more flexible or stronger or regulating your nervous system. And yes, it does all of that. But the essence of the yogic practice was actually for this mystical purpose, for this evolution, this spiritual evolution or soul evolution that you're speaking to, that does actually have physiological kind of consequences and effects. And it's helpful, I think, to remember that, or be reminded of that, and that it's not just about wellness or, nervous system regulation, but that there's something even more interesting happening there, or more directed, or more, spiritual. Like there's something deep happening. Do you have any insights into what is the result of that when actual Kundalini happens, when it connects to the pituitary or to the brain and you've channeled this energy? What are the spiritual benefits of that? Why would anyone want to practice yoga in the first place?
Well, if let's put it this way, if one is to practice it, just do it sincerely, right? Like you're into it, and your relationship with the yoga practice is most likely going to change, because everything's changing over the years. The physical is quite important, like I'm just having a good read of the Dhammapada, right? So that's the Buddhist teaching text that's for not just for the monks and nuns, right? For people in the world, and it's but it's based on teachings from the actual Buddha, and it's emphasized health and strength of the body is important. Mm-hmm. But health and strength of the body is important to experience the Dhamma and to have the awakening of the consciousness, hence Buddha, right? Mm-hmm. So I like to sometimes look at it like this, that yoga practice on a basic level is positive, as you just said, for health and well-being. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit of a push and pull, because if you're just doing it for that, you may not be as fully engaged. And back to what I said earlier, you may not get all the full benefits, see? Mm-hmm. Then it's just one of the things I do. But yoga practice being has the potential to experience more than I know, to allow me to experience more than I know now, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an element of the unknown. So, in my case, I went into practice, and then I get into pranayama, and then I'm doing pranayama directly with Tawari, and I hear about what to work with or channel, and there can be experiences of Kundalini or meditation, but it's all unknown to me, Do I just trust this man? No, not directly, not specifically. That's sort of blind faith, and that's where the whole guru follow, get lost thing comes in. But it's more like, okay, let me trust what I'm doing and the practice. And then in time, which will be different than the experience he's had or his teacher had, etc., there's its own manifestation, direct personal experience. And all that was, wow, I didn't know that this was possible within a human life to experience the change in consciousness and understanding of how you see the world and how you can relate to other people or manage yourself while still being stuck in the world and having to deal with daily stresses and people and work and paying bills, etc. So then, if you want to go past doing yoga for maybe your health and well-being, if you want to go past that, one level is you can really hit the health and well-being, because I've just shown it in the scientific studies, by being more in it engaged. But two, there's a potential still within the human system that isn't fully understood, but these spiritual traditions look at it, that can be realized. In other words, my life isn't just about being successful because I've got a big name and I've made more money, I've met my partner, I've had my kids, which are all great things, okay? And then what? I'm still going to die. So what am I? Is there something more that can be accessed while being in this body, with this mind, living this life? And I would say the yogic meditative tradition, which is almost similar to the teachings that the Buddha is coming out with. And when you get into other traditions, you can find it. Like I get very much into the Taoist stuff too, and then you start to see, oh, they're tapping something in me that's potential, that requires a little tuning in. And so these practices that stabilize my body, give me better health, now work on my emotional and mental side and help me tune in even more. And as I start tuning in even more, sort of managing my general health, and so on, a certain magic occurs, and then you can have experiences of that are more robust, more like sort of solid across your nervous system, how you're dealing with life, but then some sort of change, and ultimately, that's the point of Kundalini meditation, completely in consciousness. So to say one meditates really means I'm doing a technique. And even asana and pranayama, they're all techniques of meditation. To say one experiences meditation, that's where this language was specific. Now you've gone through your spiritual puberty. Now you've gone through a Kundalini. Now you can actually go into a different level of practice, which is internal practice, meaning outside you might see me sitting there with my eyes closed, etc. But my mind could be busy here and there, so I'm still technically an external practitioner, right? Mm-hmm. Or I might absorb. That means, okay, things are good. You're getting closer. But to have the capacity for those inner changes, that now a lot of the teachings talk about, that's where the yogic practices are crucial. And they bring about, for Patanjali, it was you go from dharana to dhyana, and then you're on the internal. For the tantrics, they use poetic language, hence Kundalini, and then Hatha Yoga continued that. But you'll see it as different terms in a Buddhist teaching, in Zen and in Taoist, and even in like, say, some of the more mystical Christian and Jewish and Islamic approaches,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is that why you would call it Hatha-Raja yoga? Because the Hatha leads to this inner Raja yogic experience?
Well, good, great question, and glad you brought that up. Well, actually, when you read the texts, it like even if you take the Hatha Pradipika, or what people call Hatha Yoga Pradipika, but Hatha Pradipika, it's a teaching on Hatha and Raja, right? And as it says, there's no Raja without Hatha, meaning there's no dinner on the table in front of you if you don't prepare it in the kitchen beforehand, right? And but also Hatha without a kind of internal experience is just material. It's just sort of mundane. It lacks its real value and purpose. So I call it Hata-Raja because that's what the texts are specifically doing. Like the fourth chapter of the Hatha Pradipika is all about you experience Kundalini, you go through these 4 different inner stages as part of Raja Yoga. See? So actually, that classic text, and it is a great text, even though there's others to kind of input with it, is 3 parts taking you through the Hatha techniques, asana, kriyas, pranayama, mudras, and then one final big chapter on the Raja. So in a traditional sense, it's actually Hata-Raja because it came out of Tantra 4 yogas, which was mantra, hatha, laya, raja, right? Mm-hmm. So you drop those 4, and then you have this sort of combination of what you do to what you experience. It's like the Tao De, right? The yin yang aspect of Tao De, Hatha Raja, these 2 aspects. And then it makes up yoga in its kind of well-defined sense, you know? And so that's purely just even what the texts have approached it as. But then, yeah, to your question, when if this becomes a practice for you to go deeper in, it is a whole process of Hatha Raja. Yeah. Meaning you're going to experience, hopefully you're going to experience something deeper at some point.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And that's the whole Raja aspect, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, we met in Thailand a long, long time ago at your first manifestation of Yoga Thailand, but now you have shifted locations, I guess years ago, probably about 15 years ago now. Yeah. Samhita Yoga, right? And tell us a little bit about where people can find you and what you're offering and how all of your studies and work has culminated in this beautiful retreat center you have.
Yeah. Well, Samahita retreat is on Koh Samui in Thailand. A beautiful spot on the beach, 200 meters of beachfront at this point. So yeah, it's been a growing, developing structure since our early days there, and that's ongoing practices. Also have some of the fitness stuff in it. You could say what I talked earlier about breath-based comprehensive yoga. That's part of the daily curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. Along with extra fitness, how we do the food, life at the beach. Saunas, cold plunge,
infinity pool.
two infinity pools at
wow.
that. But the key is we're right at the beach, like yeah. So the regular daily kind of yoga shala is 5 meters from the beach, like right there. So and then my teaching is sort of shifting to mainly just focusing on a couple of programs, and I'm mainly just focusing on the pranayama trainings that I'll do now, as I kind of figure out the other mix of things for me in life. And I'm kind of late to the game on public outreach and social media, but I had to finish my studies and do all these other things, but now I'm starting to go more out there or public, beyond just the previous decades of yoga workshops, etc. So yeah, I am on Instagram, and I try to put up short, little, helpful videos, teaching things and tips of how to apply it in life. Really, like look, this will help you with sleep, or this is how I approach my coffee, or green shake, etc. As well as some specifics on some of these pranayama techniques. Mm-hmm. And then, but that whole space for me is what's going to develop and open up more in the next few years. After some of these papers get published out there, and then there's other things to write. So in a way, it's physical location Samahita in Thailand, then Paul virtually on Instagram, and then other things that will come out there as the time passes.
Yeah,
maybe the next time we're talking here.
Yeah, to your book release. I'm sure it'll happen one of these days.
Yeah, well, there's two specific books I've lined up to work on, and now is the time, it seems, Yeah. But I need to finish the layout of these mega papers first, so I'm probably tied up in that for the next few months.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, when we were learning pranayama with you and with Shri Pitawari, there was barely anybody teaching pranayama or breath work, and I feel like the breath work, breathing, online, offline sphere opened up, and I guess it's increased over 300% since 2020, just exploded.
Probably 3,000, 300,000%, because there was no commercial avenue for the breath prior to COVID. There was a little bit, but not much. And yeah, if I had a reputation in pranayama, that's because people were specifically interested in it, in the yogic path.
Yeah.
But Kuvalyananda, Tiwari's teacher, in something like 1959, said to Tiwari, "You will see, sometime in the future, there will be the time of public interest in the breath. The breath will become popular." And Tiwari used to always say this to me. And I was like, okay, let's see. And then
I remember this.
Yeah, and then boom, COVID. So what I say to him now is, well, breath has become popular, but that doesn't necessarily mean pranayama specifically has become popular. But, so on one level, it's great. More people interested in breath and interested in doing so-called breath work, etc. And then the other, and I did a post on this, is that there's a difference between working with the breath. It's kind of back to your earlier point of, do I just do some breath hacks? Oh, hold on, I'm feeling a bit anxious. Hold on. I heard this on Huberman where he's saying sigh. Okay, now I feel a bit better. So those are mini band-aids at best here and there. Yeah. Whereas what I'd love to encourage, and I'm guessing, people listening to this and still listening, God bless you, are have some interest in sort of practice and putting that in their life. Then what I'd love to encourage is, a little bit of investment in time, but on a regular basis, gives the true value of these practices.
Yeah, definitely. Can't beat it, right?
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It was so nice to reconnect with you. And, just hear all about your work and what you're up to now.
Yeah, thank you. And it is my pleasure, Harmony, to be back here talking with you. We bonded 22 years ago and spent our few years together. So it's nice to sort of, even though we're still young ones, watch the decades go by and then meet in this kind of format. Yeah. I've enjoyed talking and sharing a few stories, and I hope that has been of interest to those of you who've listened.
I'm sure it will be. It's great. And I feel there's a lot of misinformation out there. And also people are very interested in understanding at a deeper level, I think, what's actually going on when you practice yoga, or where to look for things, signs, feelings?
Yeah, I think the next stage is about genuine and sincere, like, boom, yeah, the breath and other things, wellness factors have blown up out there and hacks, but you can only go so far. So now won't be for everybody, but okay, a little more genuine, authentic, and the key, be sincere.
Engaged practice.
Yeah, yeah, super.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I absolutely loved this conversation, and I hope you did too. I hope you were taking notes and are curious, are interested in learning about the true, traditional, authentic pranayama practices and what they can do to benefit your life. And I have a special offer for you if you are interested in learning deeply about these pranayama practices. I have a free offering, a free masterclass that I'm offering on May 10th and 11th. It's a Saturday and Sunday, and I would invite you to come in to this masterclass so that you can learn 3 foundational practices and just start your own pranayama practice, your own breathwork practice every day. They're easy to do. It takes less than 10 minutes, and it can really affect not only your nervous system, but your ability to regulate stress, to feel calm. It's going to affect your mental clarity and your ability to even emotionally connect with the people around you. You will start feeling better just by doing these 3 practices. So please sign up for my masterclass either on Saturday or Sunday and come on in. I cannot wait to help you get started in really learning the traditional pranayama practices as I was taught from my guru and Paul Dallaghan's guru as well, Sri O.P. Tiwari. These will change your life. They've changed my life. They've changed Paul's life, and I know they will change your life too. I have absolutely no doubt. If you do the practice, you will receive the benefits. They're incredible, incredibly powerful, and you just have to get started. So come on in. The link's in the bio. Sign up for the masterclasses today. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.